Many movies during history have mixed different genres to create singular stories. And there's an old movie that does this very well, blending genres that I particularly love: the Western and space movies. And this movie is Outland from 1984, directed by Peter Hyams and starred by Sean "the Man" Connery. In my misadventure searching for old sci-fi movies that could be forgotten and that I can talk here in the channel, I decided to give a chance to this movie, which I always see in the poster with an imponent Sean Connery holding a shotgun and a star of sheriff in his chest, and the space behind him. And I had seen many other channels talking about it, so I finally decided to give it a chance. And it was with great happiness that I discovered another gem to bring it here, besides the fact of having this very singular characteristic of mixing these two very exciting genres. The story is about Marshal William O'Neill, who is designated to work on a space station with a titanium mining colony on a moon. In this location, a series of strange deaths are occurring with the workers of this colony. Some of them are having psychotic episodes, having illusions that make them take their own lives in bizarre ways, like opening their own space suits in space or walking into an elevator that takes straight to space, eventually dying of decompression. This brings Marshal O'Neill to investigate these deaths to discover what's going on, throwing him into a mystery plot where the company behind this mining colony seems to be pretty aware of why these deaths are occurring, and it looks like they are throwing all this stuff to under the carpet. But for being an honorable man, Marshal O'Neill will go against the superiors of the company, even though he doesn't have any support, even from his own men working with him in the police force. And right away the movie left me intrigued because it starts with a very similar tone to none other than Alien from 1979, one of my favorite movies in this life, and this kind of bothered me in the beginning because the releasing year of both movies are very near, just 2 years apart, so one without information can suppose that Outland, coming 2 years after Alien, copied many ideas from it, starting by the opening credits with very slow lettering showing up in mid-space, and then going into all the production design of the space station, including the spacesuits, that are very similar to the ones in Alien. But little by little, as the plot of the movie develops, because this is a slow burn movie, which is not filled with action and explosions and fights, there's a slow investigation being conducted by Marshal O'Neill that will eventually lead him to the real truth, making the movie seem a little bit boring in its first act. But then as I slowly realized what it's trying to do, that is to bring this idea of a Western in space, showing that Marshal O'Neill is just like the sheriff of a small town who is not welcomed and not liked by anyone who lives in it, that all these elements became fascinating for me as I moved along. So the mood that is very similar to the first Alien fits very well in here, because it brings the character of Sean Connery to this isolation that makes him this character that is basically an outlander that nobody wants in there, and the superiors are even planning to take him out of the game, if necessary by killing him. The mood is also clever by showing his loneliness by having no allies, except for one that I will talk about later, and being very far away from his own family, which he left to do this job in the colony. This brings a great conflict to the character about his own motivations and about what he believes is the right thing to do. Apparently, the story of this movie is based on an old western from the 50s called High Noon, starred by Gary Cooper, which has exactly this idea. It's about a sheriff who has no allies in a small town where he can clearly see the corruption going on, and by his standards, he must do the right thing, otherwise no one else will. An element that brings an excellent tension to the movie, which will slowly develop into a final confrontation with both sides, the just and the corrupt, fighting each other. And here we have a Sean Connery in one of his best performances, in my opinion. This is a moment in his career that is before The Untouchables, which he won an Oscar for. But it's an example of a movie that shows the great performance that he was capable of delivering just by his eyes, showing the affliction of this character, not only by being far away from his family, but also by finding himself in a rat's nest. Personally, my favorite line from him in this movie is when a guy asks him, "Hey, where the hell are your men?" And he goes, "My men are shit." And the only ally of his in this whole station is Dr. Lazarus, who analyzes the bodies of the workers who died in a bizarre fashion. And she will play a very pivotal part in the end of the movie by helping Marshal O'Neill to escape a plot conjured by the company's superiors to kill him. I went completely blind into this movie without knowing anything about it. I even thought there might be some kind of alien along with Sean Connery in this space station, but when I realized it was a western in space, exemplified by great scenes like the one which Marshal O'Neill enters a bar, which in this case is a very futuristic bar, but then a huge silence is settled in the place and everybody starts looking at him because he is not welcomed there. I became fascinated by this genre blending that I never saw before. And the idea that the production design sometimes is basically identical to the one in Alien, in that movie's case in the Nostromo spacecraft, works very well because if you remember in that movie, the whole idea is that the Nostromo crew were space truckers. So they were blue collars working with rough machinery, and they were also working under a very evil corporation that had very obscure intentions by treating them as expendable individuals. We have the same idea here, and the company that rules this mining colony has a name as well, Conan. Not Conan from Arnold Schwarzenegger, but Conan that is very similar to Weyland-Yutani from Alien. And this created big theories for the fans of this movie here, and also the fans of Alien, that both movies might have a connection and might even take place in the same universe. Of course, these are just fan theories, but they would explain a lot about the movie in case the producers of Outland really had the intention of connecting both movies, especially because of such similar production design. After all, this could be a pattern of constructions that both companies used in their ships and installations. And I love this theory. Of course, Alien and Outland are very different movies. One of them we have an actual alien, and the other is a western in space. But it's very interesting to suppose that both movies take place in the same universe, especially because I like much more this kind of connections between movies than a whole shared universe where stories of a specific movie affect the story of the other one. But again, it's just a fan theory. It's interesting because you can keep it in your mind while watching it, and it makes the whole experience even more interesting. And even though this is a movie with a slow burn, in the end, you're gonna have eventually some action scenes that take Sean Connery to space to fight these other officials sent by the company to kill him. All because he discovered the reason for which these miners were dying, which I won't spoil here because if you didn't watch the movie, it's much more interesting discovering along with the character. But the action scenes are very well done for the time, including the use of miniatures, matte paintings for the sets. It's all very well crafted here, and that takes me to the filmography of Peter Hyams, which has become one of my favorite directors that are kind of unknown to the great audience. In his career, he directed action movies like Time Cop with Jean-Claude Van Damme, Sudden Death, also with Van Damme, which is a movie that I love and I had made a video about it here in the channel. A Die Hard-esque movie that takes place in a hockey game, and the only movie to put Jean-Claude Van Damme fighting against a team mascot. They're both great movies, but he also has others like The Relic, which is a creature movie that takes place in a museum in New York. I also watched this one recently and it's pretty cool. And there are other two movies that I cannot forget to mention here in this video, because I also had the chance to watch them recently and they are both fascinating. The first is 2010, The Year We Make Contact. That is the sequel to 2001, A Space Odyssey. For those who don't know or don't remember, 2001 does have a sequel, both in book form and in movies. That is this one, 2010, a very good movie for what it deserved to be. After all, one could think, why the hell 2001 needed a sequel, being such a unique and brilliant movie? But here Peter Hyams tells the story after the events of 2001, with American and Russian astronauts joining forces to discover what happened to the crew and the ship of 2001. Oh, and of course also discover what happened with the AI robot HAL 9000. It's a movie that is very different from the one of Kubrick, especially in the direction style, because Peter Hyams never tries to copy Kubrick. He has his own style that is much less contemplative than Kubrick's movie, but that tells a story that complements 2001, showing the great monolith that was a huge part of the first movie, now helping mankind to find a middle ground between their fights, especially between countries. And again, just like the first movie, this is an element that plays in the whole theme of human evolution. Plus, here we also have a great cast with the always fantastic John Lithgow. We also have a young and always gorgeous Helen Mirren playing a Russian cosmonaut. And of course, one of the greatest actors that should be remembered much more today for being an icon, Roy Scheider, who has been in iconic movies, like for example, The French Connection with the recent late Gene Hackman. He was also in one of my favorite movies, Sorcerer, directed by William Friedkin, the director of The Exorcist, and of course, Jaws. So 2010 is an exceptional movie that I also suggest if you want to watch an intelligent sci-fi movie that continues the elements of 2001 with great dignity. And another sci-fi movie of his that is very interesting is Capricorn 1, that tells a thriller/suspense story of the first mission to Mars. But actually the 3 astronauts that are part of the crew of the mission are prevented from going into the real mission before being launched into space and are placed in a movie set where they will be filmed to simulate the real mission taking place. Just like the theory that the moon landing never occurred, and it was all made up and shot by Stanley Kubrick, ironically. Of course, the 3 astronauts will rebel against this whole farce and try to escape in order to reveal to the public what is really going on, only to be chased by government officials in a real desert, ironically just like the terrain of Mars. And these officials will try to eliminate them in order to tell the public that they actually died during the mission's return. It's a very interesting plot and also a very well done movie, including some very bold action scenes. The main one is towards the end of the movie with a biplane taking one of the astronauts on its wing while being chased by 2 army helicopters. And it flies through the desert in a very acrobatic fashion, wonderfully shot by the director. So for those who think Tom Cruise during his daring stunts in the next Mission Impossible was a great deal, know that this scene was very much copied from Capricorn 1. And I'm telling all this just to say how much the filmography of Peter Hyams is fascinating. There are other movies that I still have to watch, but I'll probably bring them in the future as well here in the channel. And of course, Outland is a great example in this filmography, and now has become one of my favorite space movies ever. So, what do you think? Have you watched Outland? If so, what did you think? Comment below. And if you are liking the content of Trashing with Gus, please don't forget to leave your wonderful like in this video and your beautiful subscription so we can keep talking about sci-fi movies, horror movies, trash movies, everything we love in this life, alright? See you in the next trashing video, and bye-bye!